Hello, everybody. Turn this phone down here real quick. Kind of got a lot going on here at the house. So I want to welcome you all back to the Sleuth Intuition channel. I'm your host, Patrick Vallejos, and we are broadcasting to the world live from Phoenix, Arizona. We will be taking a look at some of the evidence, sometimes referred to as the smoking gun evidence in the Abby and Libby case, often referred to as the Delphi murders. We have a lot of information to go over, so we're not going to waste much time with introductions. But I do want to welcome in Linda. Hope you're having a great day. Thank you for your your kind words. Jill Moser, welcome. Night Shadow, how you doing? True Crime Housewife, Beth, how are you doing? Silas, Hathers, how are you? Piper's Dream. So far, so good. Thank you. No Effects, what's up? Thin Mint. CJK. All right, guys, we have tons of information to go over here. So if you guys could, now that we're early in the stream, make sure you hit the like button. Go share this on your social media real quick, Facebook, Twitter, your own personal YouTube channels. And the reason for today's live stream, of course, is the main piece of evidence that they have against Richard Allen is an unspent bullet. Now, I'm assuming that's their quote unquote nexus, unless you can consider Richard Allen's own words being, there that day as a nexus. This is the piece of evidence that ties him not only to the trails, but to the crime scene. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. So here, let me share my screen with you guys. Welcome in, Sees Through. Sparky, good morning. Doing well. Hope you're doing well. Solar Chef Steph, welcome in. Nana. The Real Dragon, good afternoon. Okay, so this is how we've gotten to this point. This is going to be little clips from the probable cause affidavit that was released to the public. Let's see here. Victim 1 and Victim 2's deaths were ruled as homicides. Clothes were found in Deer Creek belonging to Victim 1 and Victim 2, south of where their bodies were located. There was also a .40 caliber unspent round less than 2 feet away from Victim 2's body. Between Victim 1 and Victim 2's bodies. The round was unspent and had extraction marks on it. So this is going to be what they're going to argue during trial, and they're arguing it already. We saw the motion in Lemony, and we'll go over that here in just a little bit. We'll go over that next. Good to see you, Shadowbox. Yankee Ghost, what's up? It's always good to catch you in the chat. Caricature, off work early. Perfect timing. Okay, so October 13th, 2022, investigators executed a search warrant of Richard Allen's residence at 1967 North Whiteman Drive in Delphi, Carroll County, Indiana. Among other items, officers located jackets, boots, knives, firearms, including a Sig Sauer model P226 .40 caliber pistol. Between the 14th and the 19th of 2022, October, the Indiana State Police Laboratory performed an analysis on Allen's Sig Sauer model P226. The laboratory performed a physical examination and classification of the firearm, function test, barrel and overall length measurement, test firing, ammunition component, characterization, microscopic comparison, and NIBIN. That's the National Integrated Ballistic Info Network. The laboratory determined the unspent round located within 2 feet of victim 2's body had been cycled through Richard M. Allen's Sig Sauer model P226. And we'll go into that specifically. We'll learn a little bit about what classification means throughout the live stream. So right now, Richard Allen's defense team they're not trying to argue against the tool marks or the bullet. They're just flat out saying that's junk science. And we're going to argue that today. Play a little devil's advocate, but also, we'll bring this to a conclusion, and we'll make our point at the end of the live stream. I think it'll be clear. Christine, what's up? It's not what we're talking about today. Let's try to stay focused here. What's up, little one? That looks so much like you yesterday was wild. You know what? I get that a lot. I have one of those faces. He was delivering my new washing machine, and I thought I was being punked. Happened to be watching at the same time. I get that a lot. Like one time, I was at work, and I worked in this large office, and they have these big screen TVs, and they'll play like news and sports and stuff. People working at their desks, they can just look up, and there was this huge report out of New York, and it was a manhunt for some murderer, and they put his face up on the screen, and I was looking at it going, damn, that looks just like me. And everybody was kind of looking over at me. I was like, hey, obviously I'm not in New York. But yeah, and all the time people come up to me and they'll say, hey, Ben, or hey, Frank, or hey, Tom. And then they'll look at me and they'll be like, oh, wait a minute. I was like, yeah, my name's Pat. Sorry. So I don't know what that's all about. Okay, so they're not arguing against the evidence. They're just saying that it's not scientific. It's junk science. The method is flawed. And we're going to prove why that's inaccurate. At least we're going to try to. At least I'm going to try to explain my opinion about it. You have a doppelganger in Oregon, my friend. I guess I have a few doppelgangers. My hubs concurs. Each gun leaves striations and marks from specific gun if fired and cycled. Well, what about the guns being mass produced, right? So we're going to break it down, and I'm going to bring up something that they haven't talked about, and I don't understand why nobody's bringing this up. But we're going to talk about the original specimen, right? And the imperfections from that metal, the original specimen that's used and shaped and formed to mass produce pieces of metal for items like weapons, anything in general, really. Anything that's made out of metal. What's up, Growing Crazy? Okay, this was released a little bit later on after the search warrant details came out. This is the certificate of analysis. So, description of item, sealed paper bag containing a sealed envelope containing a .40 Smith & Wesson cartridge. Results, opinions, interpretations. The cartridge in item 016 was identified as having been cycled in the firearm in item 314 from Indiana State Police Laboratory. Remarks. An identification opinion is reached when the evidence exhibits an agreement of class characteristics and a sufficient agreement of individual marks. Sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random striated impressed marks and evidence by the correspondence of a pattern or combination of patterns of surface contours. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature and based on relevant scientific research and the reporting examiner's training and experience. So this is kind of a disclaimer. They're gonna have to add this during their testimony anyway, so they might as well just put it in here in the documentation as well. That's why they added this part here. The interpretation of identification is subjective in nature and based on relevant scientific research and reporting examiner's training and experience. Now, if they don't include that, the defense is going to object anyway and make sure that that's mentioned. So they're going to do it from the get-go. And that was signed by Melissa Oberg. And recently we saw this in the motion to limine, and I made a video on that, and I read those documents, and we'll get into that in a second. What's up, Hiawatha? Welcome in. Hey, Thersmere, welcome. Yeah, and our prayers are with you, Sparky. You know we're here for you. So laboratory activities were performed between the 14th and the 19th. And we know that Richard Allen's search warrant was served on the 13th. And I believe he was interviewed again on the 26th. And then finally he was arrested on the 28th, which was a Friday. And it was announced to the public that following Monday. Description of item: sealed cardboard box containing 1.6 Sauer P226, 40 Smith & Wesson caliber pistol, sealed manila envelope containing test-fired and cycled ammunition, sealed manila envelope containing test-fired and cycled ammunition, again, and sealed plastic bag containing 1 cartridge, another plastic bag containing another cartridge, sealed plastic bag containing 1 magazine containing 8 cartridges, and another magazine containing 9. Firearm and item 314 was examined for functional defects and test fired. No defects were found. Examination of the cartridge in item 315 revealed it to be a 40 caliber Smith & Wesson cartridge. Let's zoom down here to the remarks. Identification opinion is reached when the evidence exhibits an agreement of class characteristics and a sufficient agreement of individual marks. Sufficient agreement is related to the significant duplication of random striated impressed marks as evidence. So it's almost like they want to bring in the actual experts that's making these determinations. They want to bring them into question, because basically all you're doing is comparing, and saying, yep, we have a match. The defense is saying, well, that's flawed completely. But I feel like whenever this is discussed, they're leaving out key information, and that's going to be the point of today's live stream, and we'll work our way to that. Welcome in, Stacy. This is where I'm confused. The bullet was not fired or cycled. Correct. And we're gonna clear this all up. But it's all the same. It all boils down to tool marks. And when a gun is fired, it's going to leave tool marks. It's going to leave it on the back. It's going to leave it, it's going to leave it in multiple areas. But it all boils down to that: tool marks. Yep. No misfiring, nothing. It was just chambered and then ejected. But in order to do that, it has to bounce around different pieces of metal that are parts of the gun, and that'll leave markings on the bullet. So we'll go into the argument here. Should be a quick little video.
Remember when we first were prosecution's case against Richard Allen. It involves the method used to link Allen to an unspent .40 caliber round found near the murdered girls. The Indiana State Police Laboratory says the marks made on the ejected unfired round match marks of other ejected ammunition from a handgun Allen owns. Lab technicians made that match using tool mark analysis. Multiple studies backed by law enforcement insist guns leave unique marks on ejected rounds.
The extractor is steel, the ejector is steel. So those are going to scratch that cartridge case as it gets thrown out of the gun.
If you have two identical handguns loaded with identical ammunition, will they leave different marks?
They will.
For decades, tool mark evidence has been admitted as evidence in court cases, but insisting it's not settled science is the Innocence Project. Over the last 30 years, the organization has used DNA to exonerate 375 people in prison and also found.
And an analysis of the evidence that caused wrongful convictions revealed that flawed forensic evidence is responsible, at least in part, for more than half of the wrongful convictions.
Okay, and I want to clear this up. So what they're doing is they're using the same science, right? They're using the same science. They're just using advances in technology. So I don't know why they're calling it flawed science, because what they're doing is they didn't have the same technology, let's say in the 90s. So they weren't able to, they didn't have the same microscopes to use. So they're using the same idea. They're just using better tools. So let's say in the 90s, you would have experts that would give their opinions, and they would say, hey, yep, this, 100%, it's my opinion that this was ejected from the same firearm, or this bullet was shot through this gun. And the people that are being released now, they're using the same science, just with better technology, to say, hey, look, now that we got better microscopes and better tools, we can see that that's not true. We can see that, this is not the same. This bullet was not ejected from this weapon or was not fired through this gun, but they're using the same science. So they're being a little misleading here.
Convictions.
That includes tool mark analysis. If Allen's defense team is successful challenging the tool mark analysis of that unfired round, that could be huge in this case. That single round of ammunition is the only publicly known piece of evidence that places Allen at the scene where the murdered girls' bodies were found. Steve Brown, Fox.
So yeah, they're being a little misleading there. So they're using the same analysis. They're still using tool mark analysis to free these people. They're just having them retested and proven to be that the original analysis was inaccurate. Oops, sorry about that. So here, let's take a look at a couple photographs here. So here's a ballistic microscope. And as the technology gets better, the closer they can zoom in on these items. So it's not like they're not doing tool mark analysis to free these people. They're just retesting them with new technology. So I don't know why they were being misleading like that. And we'll go over some of the cases where people were cleared and some of the cases where people were convicted recently. So here's an example of ejector marks. So it's not necessarily the shape here. It's going to be the striated marks here. So when you mass produce them, and let's say you have a gun that's fired from the exact same type of gun, say a Glock, You may have this triangular shape, but what you're not going to have are these striated marks here that are matching. Now, these are caused from imperfections that are, you cannot avoid it. You just can't get rid of the imperfections in metal. So when they say it's not scientific, it 100% is. And we'll get into that. You're asking what what might an ejector be? It's this piece of metal here. So when you pull the slide back, it's going to force the bullet to rub up against the ejector, leaving a mark on the cartridge, and then kind of flinging the bullet out in order to allow another one to come in from the magazine. So you have chamber marks here that you could probably use as well for tool marks, ejector marks, firing pin marks, some more, so extractor and ejector. Maybe this video will help here. So it says here, when a bullet is fired from a semi-automatic handgun, the gun leaves distinctive markings on the cartridge case, which can be used to match the case to the gun from which it was fired. These marks are created by 4 parts: firing pin, breech face, extractor, and ejector. Hey, Metal, good to see you. So let's pause that. Microscopic marks. Each part has the potential to leave distinctive microscopic marks on the fired case. Yes, no effects, and I believe they already have. But they absolutely will be able to. But their test, I believe, matched. Their experts agreed. So they're not here to argue whether or not it matches or not. They're here to argue the fact that the science itself is flawed, that the methodology is not scientific per se. And that's what the recent motion that was filed in limine. That's what that's all about. And we'll go into that in detail here in a minute. Yeah, thank you guys. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, Metal. I was having some issues with my vision, and when I saw a doctor, he said it had to do with what was going on with my blood. Triglycerides and borderline diabetes. Okay, so hopefully that helps you guys understand it a little bit better. We've played this video quite a bit, but this is Robert Scremen, who was part of Richard Allen's defense team for a small period of time, and he's talking about the power of that evidence.
forensic analysis of the bullet that was found near the victim's bodies.
So the bullet, though, was not a spent bullet, correct?
That's my understanding from the probable cause. Yes, it was not fired.
Okay, it's not fired. So how do you do forensic analysis on a not fired bullet?
Well, there's two different ways of conducting that type of analysis. If a bullet is fired out of a gun, then you can conduct an analysis on the projectile itself. As it twists and comes out of a barrel, there may be different nicks and scrapes and things on the bullet. But any bullet casing that's been ejected out of a semi-automatic handgun, whether that gun has been fired or not, it is pushed into the bottom part of the barrel, and then
Good to see you, Boston.
When the slide is racked and the bullet's ejected, even if it hasn't been fired, there's still an extractor that grabs the edge of that bullet, that flips it out, and that process often, not always, but often leaves marks and dents, and those marks and dents can be very specific to the weapon that it came out of. So even if it hasn't been fired, in a laboratory, they can go back, put a similar type of shell casing in it in a laboratory environment, eject that round, and then compare the two.
Yeah, and that's what they're going to do. None of your business. Trust me, they've thought of that. That's what they're going to do, and that's what they do. If it wasn't junk science, if it was junk science, they wouldn't be using it all over the United States and all over the world. Yeah, it's very similar to a fingerprint or even facial identification. You know, it has certain or like markers that match. What's up, Frosty? Okay, this is just a small clip from the Logan Clegg murder trial. This is an expert.
Yes, I did.
Expert
Take
testimony.
that model out and show it to the jury. And could you just lift it up so the jury
Sure,
can see?
yes.
And could you tell us what this is a model of?
Yes, what I have here is a plastic model of what is a cartridge case and a bullet, well, two bullets, but for me to describe what a round
It's a
of
big-ass
ammunition is
gun.
composed of, because typically they're rather small. So this is a larger version that you all can see. So it's a plastic cartridge case, a plastic bullet, and another plastic bullet that I can demonstrate how what I'm seeing through the microscope when I'm examining bullets.
So let's start at the beginning. Could you tell us what a round of ammunition is composed of?
Yes, so a round of ammunition is composed of 4 different things. One area on the back of the cartridge case.
What's up,
The
Brad?
cartridge case is typically made of nickel or brass. The back of the cartridge case, there's an area called a primer. There's the metal cartridge case. Inside of the cartridge case is gunpowder. And then finally, the bullet is seated in the opening or the mouth of the cartridge case. So this is a round of ammunition, and this would be in a gun or in any type of firearm. And when it's fired, there's a number of things that occur. But basically, this
Thank
is
you,
a
Akers.
live round.
Thank you. And using that explanation in the model, could you tell us what happens when a gun is fired?
When a gun is fired, there's a number of things that are happening all at once, and this is happening in a split second. But there is a portion of the firearm called the firing pin, and
What's up,
that's a
Derek?
component of the gun that will strike this primer area. Now, the primer area is made of a shock-sensitive metal with other components of it that cause a small detonation. So when the firing pin strikes this, it causes that detonation. That detonation then in turn starts the gunpowder to burn,
Hey,
and that
CJK.
burning builds up a whole lot of heat
I
and
agree.
energy. That heat and energy will then force the bullet down the barrel of the firearm and onto the target. And depending on what type of firearm the person is shooting, this now empty cartridge case will either remain inside of the gun or it'll be extracted and ejected and land on the ground.
I'd like to ask you about that, but first, I think people use the term bullet colloquially, but when you use the term bullet, specifically, what do you mean?
I'm talking about when I use the word bullet, it would be the portion that comes down the barrel of the firearm. So it would be this part that's mounted or seated rather in the mouth of the cartridge case.
would it be fair to say the bullet is the part of the round that is ejected in the direction, when the trigger's pulled, the bullet is the part that goes out?
Yes, the bullet is what travels
up,
down the
Mustang?
barrel of the firearm onto the target, and then the empty cartridge case, again, depending on the gun, is either extracted and ejected, or it remains inside of the gun.
So you mentioned that cartridge
Hey,
case
She-Warrior.
can either remain in the gun or be ejected. Could you explain that?
Yes. So different types of firearms have different ways of operating. If you can imagine the type of handgun, for example, that in the movies like John Wayne carried around, he has typically what's called a revolver. The revolver has
Thank
a
you, Yankee.
barrel, and then it's the area that holds the ammunition is called the cylinder. And the cylinder is a metal cylinder that has holes or chambers in it that will fit a live round of ammunition. And so when that firearm is operated, or when it's fired, that cylinder rotates around and brings fresh ammunition in line with the barrel so that it can be fired. Those empty cartridge cases remain in the cylinder until the person operating the firearm manually removes them from the cylinder. Now, that's a little bit different from what's called a semi-automatic firearm, and that's the type of gun that you see a lot in like movies and TV and that type of thing. When the firearm is fired, again, the bullet travels down the barrel of the gun, and the energy that sent the bullet down the barrel of the gun is going to
Good to
also
see you, Roy.
operate part of the gun that extracts and ejects this empty cartridge case out of what's called the chamber of the gun. It pulls it out of there and ejects it on the ground, and then it'll take from the magazine of a firearm or the clip a fresh round of ammunition and put that into the chamber and prepares it again for firing.
Ms. Terrio, do all bullets, speaking specifically for handguns or semi-automatic weapons, are cartridge casings ejected from those in the same way for every firearm?
I'm sorry, that was in a semi-automatic, did you
Yes,
say?
for all semi-automatics.
Typically, yes. They're extracted and ejected typically on the right side of the firearm, sometimes on the left, depending on the gun, but typically on the right side of the firearm, to the right and rearward.
So do some semi-automatic weapons eject shell casings to the right?
Sometimes they do, depends on where that little port is that they would come out of, but typically on the right-hand side.
And do some other ones eject casings to the left?
Yes.
Is there a specific distance that shell casings travel when they are ejected?
It depends on the surface that a person is standing on. If it's smooth, they might roll. The cartridge cases might roll. But if
Let's go to this comment real quick. AC's through. Do the markings change over time and where? Yes, they do. So if they match, does that indicate he never used it since the murders? It doesn't mean that he never has, but the wear and tear over time can make it difficult to make a match. But in the case of Richard Allen, that was not the case. They have a match. But if there was extreme wear and tear over time, it could change, and it would make it difficult to make a match, or even impossible. But in this case, that's not what happened.
it's more of a rough surface, they may stay where they land.
I'm speaking just when a cartridge casing leaves a firearm, how far might that travel before it hits the ground?
I'm not sure. That's something that I don't particularly test.
Sorry for that question. Ms. Terrio, could you explain the comparison process generally when you are doing a firearms comparison or examination?
Yes. So typically, what I would do in a case if I'm examining bullets and cartridge cases, I have a worksheet generally that I will fill out, and that walks me through each piece of evidence. So if I'm looking at a bullet or a cartridge case, I capture all of the information, the physical characteristics about that item before I move on to any type of microscopic examination. So in terms of looking at a bullet, I'm looking at how much it weighs, what condition it's in, what it's made of. During its path down the barrel of the gun, it's going to pick up rifling or scratch marks on the surface. So I'll note how many of those are present. Once I've completed that, and I've done that for all the bullets in a particular case, then I would move to that microscopic examination if those characteristics that I initially observed on those items are similar. And again, using that forensic comparison microscope that I discussed earlier, that's the main tool that I use to microscopically examine 2 bullets. And a similar process is what I undergo for cartridge cases. Again, I have a worksheet that walks me through capturing all of the physical characteristics of a cartridge case. So what it's made of, what the primer is made of, the shape of the firing pin that struck the primer, any other features on there from the firearm that have come in contact with this cartridge case. And once I've gathered all of that information,
Welcome, Christine. Welcome to members.
Or those characteristics of those items are similar, I will then move to that microscopic exam where I can look at 2 at a time, one on each side of the microscope and do the comparison.
Ms. Terry, are you familiar with the term class characteristics?
Yes, I am.
Could you explain what that means to you as a firearm examiner?
For me, a class characteristic is an overarching feature of an item that helps me differentiate it from other items. So if I'm talking about, for example, cartridge cases, a class characteristic would be the caliber or the type of gun that it's the size of gun, if you will, that the cartridge is meant for. Another class characteristic is the shape of the firing pin that struck the primer. Typically they're circles, but sometimes there are other shapes as well. Again, they're features from an item that are determined by the manufacturer.
Ms. Terry, are you familiar with the term individual characteristics?
Yes, I am.
Could you tell us what those are?
So individual characteristics are features on an item that are sort of incidental to manufacture. The manufacturer of the item didn't put them there on purpose. A really good example to describe the difference between class and individual characteristics is, say, when you come out of the grocery store, you forget where you parked, but you know that you drive a blue 4-door vehicle, a blue 4-door car. So as you're looking for your car, you're looking through all of the cars that are in the parking lot, and you're not looking at any red 4-doors, any trucks, anything like that, like those gross characteristics that help you differentiate it. Now, individual, again, are unique to that particular item. So, for example, if you know that there's a ding on your back bumper when you bumped into something, and there's your license plate, and then you have a little sticker in the back, those are individual characteristics that help you determine, okay, this is my car versus the same type of blue car with 4 doors that parked next to you. So the similar type of thing can be applied to firearms examination. So gross characteristics of an item, such as the caliber or the firing pin shape, that type of thing, those are characteristics that the manufacturer of the gun determined to have on the firearm, versus the individual characteristics that are microscopic and they arise just incidental to the manufacturing process.
So hopefully that served as an introduction into exactly what tool marks are. Good to see you, Big Fish. Says fired manually and ejected is much different. Yeah, those things are different, but when it comes to tool marks, there is no difference. You know what they're saying, that they can determine what made those tool marks. So it doesn't matter if it went through the bullet, if it's the firing pin, if it's the extractor, the ejector. They're able to determine whether or not a specific firearm made those marks. So it doesn't matter what it is. It's all about the imperfections of that specific metal, and all metal has imperfections. That's the science behind this. That's what makes it not junk science, is that you can't produce anything from metal without there being imperfections on a microscopic level. That's the point of today's live stream. Okay, so recently, I believe it was actually just a few days ago, state's motion in limine regarding the defense witness. They mentioned a man by the name of William A. Tobin, and also a case where his testimony was thrown out. And then something very strange about the case that's mentioned, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, is it was Hennessy who was representing that case. And we'll talk about that in a few. He actually had some successes in that case. He was able to get his client released from jail. And I think even the search warrant might have been thrown out So I was surprised to see that they were not attacking the search warrant and the lost tip narrative when it came to Richard Allen, because Hennessy definitely had some success in that. So I did create a video where I read these documents. We're going to watch that here. It's not very long. It's like maybe 3 minutes. And then we'll get a little bit more into this expert. State's motion in limine regarding defense witness. Comes now the state of Indiana by prosecutor Nicholas M. McClellan for the 74th Judicial Circuit, and respectfully requests the court enter an order prohibiting the testimony by Mr. William Tobin, a listed defense witness regarding firearm examination in general, or the firearm examination specifically in this case, until a hearing may be held outside the presence of the jury to determine the relevance of Mr. Tobin's testimony. In support of this motion, the state would show the court the following. 1. That William A. Tobin is listed as a defense witness and was deposed by the state on September 20th, 2024. Mr. Tobin has testified that he is a forensic metallurgist and material scientist. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in metallurgy and a Master of Arts degree in special studies, which he testified was primarily the study of law. Number 2, in his deposition, Mr. Tobin testified that when he has been recognized as an expert in court, it has always been as a forensic metallurgist or material scientist. Number 3, Mr. Tobin stated that he has not examined the evidence in this case, though he testified he has reviewed some of the reports and notes of the state's firearms examiner, Miss Melissa Oberg. Mr. Tobin testified that though he has not reviewed all of Miss Oberg's materials, he has what he typically needs to be able to opine on the methodology that's used. Tobin went on to explain that the state's firearm expert witnesses' conclusions are based on flawed methodology. Number 4, according to Mr. Tobin, this flawed methodology is the AFTE, the Association of Firearm and Tool Mark Examiners. Theory of identification in this theory is what almost all firearm examiners follow, whether or not they are members of AFTE. Number 5, that Miss Oberg, at the time of her examination, was a forensic examiner with the Indiana State Police, and she, along with all other Indiana State Police firearm examiners, follow and apply the AFTE theory of identification. Number 6, Mr. Tobin is not an expert in the field of firearm examination, unlike another listed defense witness, Dr. Eric Warren. Dr. Warren, like the state's expert witness, Ms. Oberg, is not only a member of AFTE, but holds or has held leadership positions with the AFTE. Mr. Tobin's expected testimony will be that all firearm examiners, including Ms. Oberg and Dr. Warren, follow a flawed methodology and their opinions are not scientifically reliable. 7. However, the state believes that Mr. Tobin, who is not an expert in the field of firearm examination, lacks the qualification to testify regarding the firearm examination in this case, and that his knowledge is not such that it would help the trier of fact to understand the evidence or to determine a fact and issue in this case. Number 8. Further, the state believes that Mr. Tobin's testimony would lack relevance under Ind R Evid 401. Since he is not an expert in the field of firearm examination. Finally, that the probative value of Mr. Tobin's testimony would be substantially outweighed by the danger of confusing the issue and misleading the jury. Number 9, the state believes that the question of whether or not Mr. Tobin should be permitted to testify in this case is very similar to a recent case out of Marion County, State of Indiana versus Caden Smith. In the Smith case, Judge Harrison ruled that Mr. Tobin would not be permitted to testify, and in her order dated January 29th, 2024, said this: the witness, Mr. Tobin, was being called by the defense to testify only as to the shortcomings of firearm examination in general. This witness has not tested or reviewed any of the evidence in this case. The defendant will have the opportunity to cross-examine the state's witness to present his defense as the shortcomings of firearm examination. The court now grants the state's motion in limine, paragraph 5. Wherefore, the state of Indiana, by prosecuting attorney Nicholas C. McClellan, respectfully requests this court to grant the following relief. A. Order the defendant, through his counsel and witnesses, to refrain from mentioning, commenting, or making any reference whatsoever, either directly or indirectly, to any of the above matters without first obtaining permission of the court outside the presence and hearing of the jury. B. To further order said persons to make no reference to the fact that this motion has been filed and granted, and all other relief just and proper in the premises. Signed, Nicholas C. McClellan. Okay, let's take a look at the case that they were referring to. Caden Smith. This article is titled "Babyface Teen is Unmasked as Gunman Behind Triple Murder That Sparked Serial Killer Fears in Small Indiana Town." This was published August 27th, 2024. Babyface Teen has been unmasked as the gunman who took the lives of 3 young men in Indiana in 2021. Caden Smith, now 19, was convicted in the shooting deaths of Michael James Jr., 22, Joseph Thomas, 18, and Abdullah Mubarak, 17, on Monday, according to the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. On October 12, 2021, an off-duty police officer discovered their bodies and several fired shell casings in a wooded area near South Meridian Street and West Hannah Avenue, sparking concerns of a serial killer in Indianapolis. The prosecutor's officer identified Smith, then 16, as the killer after learning he took the boys to the field that night to show them how a Glock switch works, and discovering communication he had with the victims. It was a long and challenging road for these families, but thanks to the steadfast commitment of the investigators, deputy prosecutors, and the multitude of agencies, justice has been secured for Abdullah, Joseph, Michael, and their families, Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears said. In 2022, a judge said detectives violated Smith's Fourth Amendment right after executing a search warrant. Key evidence was then thrown out in the case, while Smith was released with the GPS ankle monitor and was restricted from leaving the state. After he was initially set free, James' mother, Gladys Larson, explained her anger with the justice system. "We did not want Caden Smith released because once again, we are back here having another conversation about this kid and his crimes," Larson told WTHR. Now remember, Hennessy was his attorney, and he was the one that achieved this goal for his client. It was long before police found that Smith violated his release order after finding Snapchat images of him posing with guns and doing drugs. He was arrested on his 18th birthday at his home, where police say they found guns, drugs, and ammunition. Smith was charged with dealing marijuana, visiting a common nuisance, invasion of privacy, and violating his pretrial release conditions. So this is who Hennessy let out, right? This is who he was able to get released. And I wouldn't blame Hennessy. You would have to blame law enforcement for violating his rights. They have a difficult task once they find out who their suspect is of getting that conviction. And there's so many different ways to get him off on a technicality. But I mean, ultimately, this is who they released. You can blame the investigators and the talents of the lawyer, Hennessy, who we now know has been participating in the Delphi murder case. At the time the murders, attorney David Hennessy argued that the guns weren't in his client's possession. They have to prove he possessed it, not that he was just in some house where there happened to be guns that were not out in the open, Hennessy told WTHR. When asked about the Snapchat photos of Smith smoking and holding up a gun, Hennessy didn't seem as confident. Yeah, I'm going to have a young person walk me through Snapchat, he said before walking away. Smith has been charged with 3 counts of murder, 2 counts of felony murder, 2 counts of robbery resulting in a serious bodily injury, 1 count of dangerous possession of a machine gun, 1 misdemeanor count of dangerous possession of a firearm, 1 count of possession of methamphetamine, 1 misdemeanor count of possession of marijuana, and 1 misdemeanor count of resisting law enforcement. Abdullah's, Joseph, and Michael's families will never be able to see them grow up and live their lives. This verdict solidifies that Smith will likely spend the rest of his life in prison for the crimes he committed. Mears said at the time, a court date for Smith's sentencing has not yet been scheduled. In March, a gunman filmed himself. Oh, this is a different story. But yeah, they were trying to call in the same expert into this case, and the judge wouldn't allow it. William Tobin. Okay, let's list. This is an article, I believe, about William Tobin, William A. Tobin. Catch up on the chat real quick. Mother of Dragons, good to see you. Welcome in. Once again, Christine, welcome to members. Glad to have you. Well, the machine gun it's not really a machine gun. It's the firearm with the switch attached to it, basically making it a machine gun. Yep, another circus. And I mean, and you can see how these defense attorneys are very skilled. And if there's any weakness to be exploited in the case, they're going to find it. That's why they were delaying this trial for so long. They were looking for anything that they could find. And I was really shocked to see them not try to exploit the whole lost tip narrative. I mean, yeah, they found the gun and they were able to match the unspent bullet casing to his gun. But how did they get there? You know what I mean? Like the lost tip narrative, they didn't have anything on Richard Allen that they didn't have from day one. There's nothing new. They didn't have a new witness. They didn't have any new tip. They just happened to find a tip that they're quote unquote claiming was lost. So I'm wondering if there's going to be more information or something that's been sealed or hidden. But I was really surprised to see Hennessy's track record and with his involvement in the Delphi case that they weren't trying to exploit that a little bit more. Yeah, Farmer, mass murder. Yep, welcome in. Oops, sorry. Okay, let's get going on this. So this is expert critiques De Jesus evidence as junk science. This was by Andrew Binion, and this was put out 2016. Port Orchard. Countering key evidence prosecutors say connects a murder suspect to a gun used last year to kill his ex-girlfriend and her roommate's 2-year-old son. A former FBI scientist testified Thursday that those conclusions essentially rely on junk science. Just because a practice is used for decades does not make it scientifically valid. A valid practice, William A. Tobin, a metallurgist who worked on several high-profile cases for the FBI, including the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995, told a Kitsap Superior Court jury. Geraldo de Jesus is charged with 2 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted murder for the shooting during the early hours of March 28, 2014. Killed were his ex-girlfriend, Heather Kelso, and her roommate's son, Caden Lum. Kelso's friend Matthew Dean was shot but survived. What a monster. Critical to the state's case is a spent 9mm shell casing investigators found at De Jesus' ex-wife's. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Had a little bit of a glitch. Let's try that again. Not sure when you guys lost me, but we'll start that part over. Critical to the state's case is a spent 9mm shell casing investigators found at De Jesus' ex-wife's house. An expert for the state told jurors this week that the markings on the shell casing are consistent with markings on shell casings found at the East Bremerton mobile home park where Kelso lived. Although the practices have been in place for several decades, Tobin said, mainstream scientists began leveling their critiques at firearm forensics in 2008. The criticism intensified as of last week with the new report that cautions courts about relying on the type of testimony Tobin said had been offered by the state's expert. Kathy Gale, a forensic scientist who worked for the Washington State Patrol and now works for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department, told jurors Tuesday that she compared the casings and found they were consistent with being fired from the same gun. She conceded it is a subjective process that involved holding the cases side by side under a microscope, but called it pattern matching and compared it to recognizing faces. Tobin told jurors that findings from evaluating tool marks, what Gale called the unique marks left on a bullet, and shell casings by the guns that fired them cannot be presented as having a high degree of certainty when attempting to match them to an individual gun. Tobin said that tool mark exams were useful to help steer investigators as well as in instances where there are multiple shooters. But the only scientifically valid statement that could be made from the tool mark analysis were to rule out a particular firearm. And Dehe Hold on, guys. I don't know what the hell is going on here. Let me try something. We'll close that down. I don't know why, but it keeps kicking me out of StreamYard. So let me try something real quick, guys. Okay, hopefully you guys can hear me okay and everything, right? Can you guys hear me and are you guys able to see? I don't know what's going on with my system, but we'll try this again. All right, thank you, Farmer. So I closed down I had a whole lot of stuff open, so we'll close all that down and maybe that'll work. Sorry about that, guys. Kind of messing with my flow here. Okay. Tobin's testimony offered jurors a crash course in the scientific method, explaining that, among other critiques, the type of firearm evidence in which the state's case hinges was a result of an unreliable process that does not produce repeatable results, the very definition of a scientific fact. So what he means by that is you can bring in one specialist and they can see a connection or a match, and you can bring in another expert and they can disagree with it. But the truth is that the majority, we're talking like less than 1%, have ever disagreed. So even though it's not scientific and it's not mathematic, it's very similar to fingerprints. You know, there's no way to prove that nobody has your same fingerprint out there in the world, right? But they can, it's a probability. It's a high probability. So when you have something that is a high probability, and then you have it, let's say, at the trails where you were walking that day and found at a crime scene, and then it matches your gun, the probability of all of those 6 hours that, that they can't test, there's no way that they can collect every 6 hour that was made in this world, just like they can't take fingerprints from everybody in the world and match them to yours. But the probability is what they're working with. So he's right, but he's wrong at the same time. He also told juries that the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology draft report approved unanimously last week stated firearm forensics does not measure up to scientific rigor. Basically, it finds firearm forensics falls very short of critical scientific issues, Tobin said. Deputy Prosecutor Barbara Dennis and Tobin sparred during cross-examination, with Dennis questioning how Tobin could dismiss the findings of the State Patrol Crime Lab, having never examined the particular shell casing himself. So this is very similar to the Delphi case. He's not even looking at the evidence because he's not an expert in that. What he's saying is that the whole foundation of this method, the methodology itself, is flawed, that it's junk science. Additionally, she questioned why during this time with the FBI, he didn't object to the agency's use of forensic science, which Tobin called an oxymoron. As a humble scientist, you don't challenge anything, particularly something that has been done for decades, if you don't have your ducks in a row, Tobin said. Judge Kevin Hull had narrowed Gale's testimony, allowing her to testify that the shell casings were consistent with being fired from the same gun, and said he would allow commentary on the new report's findings. So basically, all they have to do is say, it's my expert opinion that this is a match, and it's also my expert opinion that it's most likely from the same gun. But the science, and this is kind of like a disclaimer, they have to use the word subjective, like Big Fish was saying earlier, because it is subjective, but so is facial recognition, so are fingerprints, and they're still used as evidence. Okay, now let's learn a little bit about Melissa Oberg. But on that note, guys, we are going to take a quick break. My daughter's going to the dentist, so I want to wish her off. So you guys just give me 1 second, okay? Let me put this back up on the screen. All right, I'll be right back. Give me a minute. Okay, guys, I'm back. Let's plop this back on the screen here. Maybe we'll catch them on the chat right now, too. Yeah, I don't know. I'm having like connectivity issues. Starting to piss me off. Welcome in, Annie. Yeah, we did a whole live stream on crooked cops and how they can plant evidence, But that's a felony crime. In order to suspect something like that, you need evidence, right? But yeah, we talk about that quite often on this channel, and it does happen. I mean, we did a 2-hour live stream on people just planting evidence. But they all got caught and they all got arrested. I'm sure not all of them do. Thank you, Cindy. All right. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what's going on. It keeps kicking me out. Maybe we'll be good now. I closed some windows and good to see you, Purple. And they have done blind studies where they come in and they have specialists from all over the world and they examine, and it's like 100 of them will agree that it came from the same weapon, and then like one out of 100 will say, oh well, I don't see, I don't agree with that assessment. So it's almost perfect, but it is ultimately subjective. Shadow. He's like a professional defense witness or expert, you know what I mean? He just doesn't agree with the science. But the truth is the science is getting people who were wrongly convicted released as well, and we'll look at some of those cases. So if it can get them released from prison, it can send them to prison, in my opinion. Hey, Crime Jester, welcome in. Nana Louise, welcome in. Hey, thank you. Yeah, make sure you guys hit that like button. Go share this video too on your social media. Let's get some other folks in here. Smells like fear. Yeah, no, I call them mouth mechanics. When you go to the mechanic, oh, you need new brakes, you need new tires, you need new shocks, you need this, you need that. You need a complete overhaul. It's like, what are you expecting them to say? Yeah, it does happen. There are cops out there that will plant evidence. That's why you can't go around trusting people too much. But like I said, to make that kind of an accusation, you need solid evidence. You can't just say, oh, well, I don't trust these guys. They might have planted the bullet. You can't, in my opinion, you just can't live that way. You need evidence to back something like that up. But to say it doesn't happen would not be honest. For sure. Yeah, the likelihood that it's not his firearm is what they're going to judge it on. That's like if they found Richard Allen's fingerprint and somebody came in and said, well, you haven't tested everybody on the planet. You don't have everybody in Indiana's fingerprint. So how do you know there's not somebody with the same fingerprint? Well, you don't know that. It's the probability of it. It's like winning the lottery. Maybe even times 10. Shout out to the replay crew. All right, we're all caught up. Okay, let's take a look at Melissa Oberg. So this is titled Indiana State Police presents 2015 Forensic Science Scientist of the Year Award. And that's her there, Melissa. The Indiana State Police Forensic Scientist of the Year Award is presented annually to a forensic scientist within the laboratory division deemed to have consistently provided a superior quality forensic analysis service in a highly professional, proficient, and unbiased manner for the Indiana criminal justice community. Forensic scientist Melissa Oberg's accomplishments in 2015 are worthy of such recognition and have earned her this award. The 2015 award was recently presented to Oberg, and the below information outlines her outstanding work that resulted in this acknowledgement. In 2015, Forensic Firearm Identification Unit forensic scientist Melissa Oberg completed 269 cases involving 1,698 laboratory examinations. During these examinations, she performed 1,160 microscopic comparisons, which exceeded the Forensic Firearms Identification Unit average of 773 comparisons. Her case turnaround time from the data submission to completion was 82 days, which was below the Forensic Firearms Identification Unit average of 91 days. Ms. Oberg produced results of the highest quality and successfully completed all proficiency and competency testing. She volunteered to work 11 rush cases and 5 police action shootings, and she completed 129 technical and administrative reviews, other analyst and supervisors' casework. In 2015, forensic scientist Oberg assisted the Forensic Firearms Identification Unit to branch out into field support. After completing a shooting scene reconstruction school, she was instrumental in the establishment of proper field documentation protocols that changed how laboratory forensic scientists provide field services in order to better assist local and state police crime scene investigators. In addition, forensic scientist Oberg was assigned as the lead trainer in educating a new employee in the field of firearm identification. So she has a protege. She coordinated the training within the National Firearm Examiners Academy, was solely responsible for this individual's training locally, and is now subsequently reviewing the analytical examinations of this new employee's casework. This assignment took a considerable amount of time and research coordination to complete in a successful manner. Forensic scientist Oberg is a member of the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners Board of Directors, and she also serves as the AFTE treasurer. AFTE is the International Association with worldwide membership. She regularly interacts with the AFTE members by handling payments, bills, and answering questions. She handles inquiries involving the AFTE Journal and is a voting member of the Board of Directors. In addition, she sits on a professional investors committee for AFTE, which involves decisions regarding a scholarship endowment and areas in which AFTE invests its assets. In short, forensic scientist Oberg is responsible for the day-to-day fiscal operation of this association, whose assets total nearly $700,000. Forensic scientist Oberg has an undergraduate degree in chemistry from St. Joseph College, where she was also a collegiate athlete. Playing on the tennis team. She started employment with the Indiana State Police Laboratory Division January of 2006 at the Lowell Regional Laboratory as a member of the drug unit. In November 2006, she was hired as one of the first civilian firearm examiners assigned to the Forensic Firearms Identification Unit in the Laboratory Division. She is also certified fellow by the American Board of Criminalistics and is certified by the Association of Firearm and Toolmark Examiners in the area of firearm identification. Melissa resides with her husband, Chris, in Indianapolis. Okay, so that's going to lead us to imperfections. And this is what we'll finish with. Okay, this is how they're going to cut, shape metal. These are the different methods for doing that. Right, farmer? Whenever somebody doesn't agree with you, right, it's a kangaroo court. You know, these highly trained professionals don't agree with me. It's got to be a kangaroo court. All right, cutting methods. Laser cutting, highly precise cutting using a focused laser beam, ideal for intricate designs on various metals. Water jet cutting uses a high pressure water jet to cut metal without heat, suitable for delicate materials and leaving a clean finish. Plasma cutting, using an ionized gas to melt and cut through metal, effective for thick metal plates. Shearing, mechanical cutting process using shears to cut sheet metal with a clean edge. Punching, creates holes or cutouts of specific shapes in sheet metal using a punch. Sawing, using a saw blade to cut metal with various types, different applications like a hacksaw or bandsaw. Shaping methods, bending, deforming sheet metal into a desired shape using a die and punch, creating curves or angles. Stamping, using a stamping die to cut, pierce, or shape sheet metal into complex designs. Machining, a broad category of metal shaping using cutting tools to remove materials and create precise features. Welding, joining pieces of metal together using heat. Casting, pouring molten metal into a mold to create a desired shape. Okay, now this is the point of today's live stream. Yes, all metals have imperfections. Point defects. These defects includes vacancies, interstitial atoms, substantial impurity atoms, line defects, also known as dislocations. These defects include edge dislocations, screw dislocations, and mixed dislocations. Grain boundaries. These two-dimensional defects are regions between different grains within a material. Volume defects. These defects are three-dimensional clusters of point defects. Imperfections are unavoidable and are driven by entropy. They can affect many of the metal's properties and not always negatively. For example, the presence of block walls or ferromagnetic materials like iron and nickel allows them to be magnetized, demagnetized. Researchers also harnessing imperfection in alloys to make them stronger while retaining flexibility. So now let's take a look at imperfections under a microscope. Okay, so now the imperfections I'm referring to come from the original specimen. So when you're making a mold or however you're shaping or molding the metal that you're using in a factory to create the firearm, you see all these imperfections here? See all these little imperfections throughout the metal? These are what are making tool marks specific to an individual firearm. It's these imperfections here. So it doesn't matter how you cut it or how you shape the metal. The original specimen is going to have its own specific imperfections. And that's where the science is. Now, are you going to say that it's possible that there's another firearm that has similar imperfections? Yeah, but the likelihood, it's just too random. There's nothing specific about these imperfections. And that's how they're able to determine whether or not it belongs to a specific handgun, are these imperfections. So you can use the same cutting technique, the same computer program, and you can make, copy after copy of the same piece, the same extractor for thousands and thousands of firearms, but it doesn't matter because the original specimen of metal is going to have its own unique imperfections. You just can't get around it. So it doesn't matter if you've made the pieces of metal with laser. It doesn't matter how you cut the metal or the piece of metal that's going inside of the firearm, or to create the barrel or, you know, the extractor or the ejector. It's going to look the same to the naked eye. It's going to have the same computer program that's put, you know, into the laser cutter or however you're going to shape the metal, but it doesn't matter. The original specimen is going to have these imperfections here. And that's what it boils down to. All right, now we're going to open it up for discussion. I don't know why I did that again. All right, let's close this out. All right, we made it through even with all of those strange distractions. So what do you guys have to say about the information that was presented today? I'm curious. I agree with you, Cindy. I think she's being fair. Right. And what kind of fantasy land is it? Is she working with the defense or working with the prosecution to steamroll Richard Allen? I mean, is there anybody out there that really believes that? Welcome in, Yonder. Evening. This is really interesting. It wasn't quite what this evidence meant, but in England, most of us don't know anything about guns. Well, this doesn't only apply to guns. They use the same science. Let's say if you use an axe or you break into a facility using a specific wire cutters or bolt cutters, you know, even though they're mass produced, metal has its own unique imperfections, no matter what. So it's not specific to firearms, anything that's made of metal. You know, you can take mass produced screwdrivers, you know, that were made the same day from the same mold, the same laser program used to cut the metal. And then you could scrape it across soft metal. And each screwdriver, even the one that was made directly after it, is going to be different. And to me, that's not junk science. The only thing that's would be considered junk science, or the junk part about it, is the who's the person making the determination, who's analyzing the serrated markings, you know, who's making the comparison, you know. And of course it should be scrutinized, and that's what the defense is going to do. And I think they've already done that. They're going to bring in their own expert. But the problem is they might agree, but there's just no way to prove, just like there's no way to prove with fingerprints, right? I mean, how could you possibly know that somebody out in this world doesn't have an identical index fingerprint as you? Well, mathematically, it's just not probable. So for you to be at the crime scene and then them to find a fingerprint, you know, for you to be near the crime scene and then them find a fingerprint at the actual crime scene itself, you know, it's just probable that it belongs to you. So yeah, I mean, there's no way to prove it mathematically, but as far as probability, that's all they're working with. Same goes with DNA. I mean, right? Or at least partial DNA. What's up, Charlotte? Yeah, it's just happened an hour ago. What did I miss? Iran has just attacked Israel directly. Oh, shit. Maybe we'll go live on channel 2 after this. That's crazy. Must be the October surprise. Here we go. Annie says they can rule a gun out for sure. No, that's the problem. They can't say 100% that it came from this gun, but they can 100% say that they can't rule it out. Same with the fingerprint. Thank you, Hiawatha. Yeah, the OJ trial. Big Fish says your fingerprints change all the time. If you get a burn on your hand, fingerprint will change. Just like with firearms, they do change. They'll wear down, and then you won't be able to make a match, right? So that'll make it difficult. But if you do have a match, that's a completely different argument. Yeah, thank you, Growing Crazy. Yeah, that's what I was trying to explain. They don't rule it out. They just can't say with 100% certainty that it came from that gun. They're just saying it's likely. It's very likely that it did. And that's the argument here. Not if it was the same tool that was being used, Annie. And that's the point. That's what they're comparing. All right, we're going to get out of here in about 3 minutes. So if you guys have anything to add, let me know. Thank you, Cindy. No, I don't know why it would do that. I mean, what do you mean? When I click it, it goes right to it. Just go to my YouTube channel, and at the very bottom, there's a link to channel 2. Yeah, Annie, you're not being realistic. I mean, you should be skeptical of the investigation, of the prosecution, but why would you question the judge? Oh, thank you, Beth. Let's close those down. I appreciate you. That'll be our last act that'll be my last act as your host. Closing down the poll. So if you guys want to participate, now's the time. Poll question is, tool mark evidence is solid or junk? 73% of you said solid, 27 say junk. So I'll give you guys a minute to vote, and then I'll close that out, and we'll get out of here. All right, Hiawatha, I'll see you later for the vice presidential debates, and maybe even here in a minute, depending on what I see going on with the attack from Iran. That's news to me. Yep, Charlotte, I agree with that. Yeah, we can agree to disagree, Annie. You know, we can argue till we're blue in the face. Farmer says, good, be skeptical. I agree with that. But you could say that about literally every case everywhere. Conspiracy as an option isn't conspiracy. Yep. And you need to have some kind of evidence. You know, I have a hunch, you know, isn't always going to cut it. You got it, Beth. Thank you so much. Thank you, Growing. See you later, Farmer. Pitbull Mom, welcome in. Let me take a look at that. Because I mean, it's very much available. I just clicked on it when you originally messaged that. Yeah, don't go to that. I don't know. Go to my actual page. Go to my page. Go to my YouTube channel page, and at the very bottom, I'm going to have channel 2 listed there. Click on that. I might need to update that or something. So don't use that. Sorry about that. I'll fix that. Yeah, you're not the only. That must be what other folks were talking about. Okay, thank you for sending me those screenshots, and now I know specifically what they're having issues with. So don't go to that. Don't go to the description and go to channel 2. Go to my actual page, and on the front page, scroll all the way to the bottom, and you'll see Chan 2 there. You got it, Stacy. Tattoo, good to see you. All right, and I'm sorry if I missed anybody, but before we get out of here, I want to give a special thanks to Jer, Yankee Ghost, and Christine. All right, guys, that poll is closed out. We ended out with 73% of you saying that it is solid, and only 26% saying junk. It's kind of what I expected. All right, guys, I'll see you a little bit later. Melissa, sorry to catch you late. Everybody else, enjoy the rest of your day. I'll catch you on the flip side. Peace out.